I'm Don. If you need to know who I really am, I'm Don Bassermann. I live in the city of Prince George. In the once upon a time, I was a city councillor there for 18 years. I did not run in the last municipal election because I thought 18 years was enough, and I wanted to be in control of my departure from council, not the community. I was also the chair of the Omineca Beetle Action Coalition, wearing my councillor's hat. When I retired from council, or from public life as I like to say it, I also then gave up the chair, and the Beetle Coalition asked me to stay close and help them with a variety of bits and pieces. This is part of those bits and pieces, although I am in CCBAC territory. But probably my primary purpose with you is to give you an opportunity to think differently than you might be thinking now about the use of land for agricultural purposes. I'm going to talk about Arctic Char. I'm going to talk about hemp. I'm going to talk about a fruit winery, willow for fuel, birch sap, potatoes, cabbages and carrots, tourism, the manure pile, goat stocks and sheep, nettles and horseradish, and I'll have run out of time before I get there. I've got to go do that. But we'll talk about these things later. Let's start over here, and I'm just going to work around and let you know what's on the table. This is a jar of honey from Jim at Hobby Brews in Prince George. Jim produces about 3,500 pounds of honey a year. That's where I buy my honey. It is local honey. It's relatively straight out of the hive, and so I make sure that I do that. This jam, I'm not sure what this is. It's bluebark. Anytime you hear me talk about blueberries, I'm talking about those little wild blueberries, because that's what I do. When I do blueberries, that's what I do. I love the commercial blueberries, and I do buy them and I do eat them, but I'm a fanatic when it comes to berry picking. And if we have time, I might talk about that. But that's bluebark jelly. This one here is raspberry. This one here is wild cranberry, high bush, wine jelly. Okay? This one here is black currant from the front yard. This is fireweed jelly, made from the blossoms of fireweed. Okay? This one here, I have an apple tree in my backyard. I actually have two now, and one going in the front yard in the spring. This is applesauce. It's coarse applesauce. I don't like the pureed stuff. My wife does, but I don't. So I've ended up being the applesauce maker. This one's made with mint from my backyard and apples from my backyard. Okay? It's really quite decent. We'll come to those in a moment. Raspberry jelly, huckleberry jam. Huckleberry jam. Huckleberry is popular wherever I go. I can bribe people really nicely with huckleberry products. Oregon grape jelly. You have Oregon grapes in this part of the world. We do get them as far as Prince George. It's a different berry to work with. Marvelous jam. Or jelly. This one here is it's lilac jelly made from the lilac blossoms in my backyard. This one is another applesauce one, but it's apple ginger. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the ginger from my backyard, but the apples came from my backyard. It's mixed with ginger. I have a mess of nephews and nieces that I spend some time with in the summer, and I make this just about every day in big quantities because it disappears. It's marvelous with pork, of course, or with chicken, or on ice cream. This one here is, another huckleberry. Did I put a couple huckleberries in there? Wow, I'm slacking. We'll deal with it. I'm going to leave that over there. This is horseradish. I'm going to speak about horseradish. You heard it on the list. I made this 2 nights ago, about 10 o'clock, before I hit the road the next morning. This is from horseradish, not from my yard. I do have horseradish in my yard, but I foraged this horseradish. People in my city throw horseradish over the fence, and you know what horseradish can do. So I just know where there's some patches, and I go dig it, and I use it. Did I leave some at the office one day? I did. Now, it could be, if you choose to take this, it could be there's small chunks of horseradish in there because the blender didn't whip it up as fine as I had hoped it would, and it's made with horseradish and cider vinegar, so if you have some reason not to like cider vinegar, that's what kind of keeps it white, and that's what's intended to help it keep its whatever potency it has. These carrots are from Dave Kellett's farm just south of Prince George. Northern Producers, I believe David calls. He has a really marvelous operation. It's a cattle operation, it's a vegetable operation, and it's a berry operation. So it's the 3 revenue streams on that farm. You'll know that I like revenue streams. This cabbage also comes from the farm. Okay, and there should have been a bag of potatoes here. They don't produce potatoes, but part of my presentation talks about cabbages, carrots, and potatoes. This is a bag of organic flour ground by a gentleman and his wife who live in Vanderhoof. Okay, their business is just exploding ever since they went organic. Organic, as you would know, because I've heard stories about you. Well, that's my job too. You know, I'm a bit of a detective because this is important to me. But if you're looking to really capitalize in markets, particularly larger markets, organic is really quite significant, and that's a whole chat in itself. These three items here are one takeaway. So if you choose to take this, this is one takeaway. These are teas. These are teas. This one is bee balm. Okay, it's from my backyard. I grow bee balm to bring in hummingbirds, butterflies, moths, and other such pollinators, and to create quite a nice smell. Little did I know of its nutritional properties until a young farmer friend of mine said, "Don, do you know what you got there?" So I went and looked, and of course, being that old school teacher type that's in me, if you do want a homework assignment, Google bee balm. You're going to get a couple of possible assignments here. This one here is lemon balm, also from my garden, also makes a fairly interesting tea. This one here is my pride and joy. It doesn't make the best tea in the world, but it's stinging nettle. And I'm going to talk about stinging nettle later in the presentation, because if you haven't Googled the nutritional properties of stinging nettle, you'd better. You'd better do that. Really quite significant. And I'll have some fun talking about that later on. Those three are one takeaway. I stand at the side of the room when I'm finished, and I watch what goes from the table first as your names come up and you trip over each other to try to get here for that bottle of wine that you want, or that jelly that you want. This is, I call this the spring wine. It's apple, raspberry, and red currant blended. Why is it the spring wine? In the spring, I go down the deep freeze and say, I got to clean this out because new berry season's starting. And that's what I had left. And it makes a marvelous wine. Anytime you blend a mess of fruits like that and have it made into wine, you can call it bumbleberry wine if you want. But it makes really quite a nice wine. This one is really quite pleasant. Actually, they all are. Huckleberry wine, I shouldn't have brought this one because it's too good. I mean, what am I doing giving huckleberry wine away? But anyhow, here's a bottle of huckleberry wine. It is a favorite everywhere. By the way, if you do choose a bottle of wine and it does have sediment in it, pour it through a coffee filter, okay? That tidies that up pretty quickly. Fruit wine, any wine will drop a sediment, fruit wines in particular. This one's black currant from my no, this is from the front yard. This is a rhubarb wine. This is from the backyard. Bonaparte Winery. We're going to talk about that later on, okay? Rhubarb wine. Raspberry, probably from my yard. Either that, I have 3 yards I work. I garden 3 yards. I garden mine. Raised beds. My daughter's containers. My son's conventional in the ground. And if you were watching Prince George News, if that happens to happen in this part of the world and you saw some silly guys putting an honor card at the end of the driveway, that was my son and I. And if you want to talk about that later on, that's a really interesting technique for marketing. This one is red currant from the front yard. This one is chokecherry from the wild, actually from Cottonwood Park in Prince George, if you really want to know. Our city parks are marvelous orchards. This one here is a blend of blueberry and Saskatoon. Probably has sediment, but it's a very nice wine. This is apple from my backyard. This one's blueberry from Tachita Lake, just north of Prince George, wild blueberries. I have about a 10,000 hectare crop of blueberries up there. If you want to come and help me anytime in mid-August onwards, I'd be happy to have your company, because we'll never pick it empty. We will have company though. They're big, black and furry, but they're way more interested in the berries than they are in us. Not an issue. Another rhubarb wine. Rhubarb is so easy. We have so much rhubarb. And if you get that rhubarb wine made and then let it sit for a year, it makes a marvelous wine. I'll tell you a story about rhubarb wine and the former minister of the Crown. Oregon grape wine. Different. Anybody ever had Oregon grape wine? Probably not. It's not made very often, but I had a batch made. And it's earthy tasting. I haven't opened a bottle for some time. So here's a jar of Oregon grape jelly. Now you notice I introduced one of those over here too. These go as one takeaway. as one takeaway, because here's the deal. If you choose to take this pear, you take the cork out of this, and you taste it, and you say, no, that's not for me to drink as a wine, which is fair. And you can do this with any bottle of wine, by the way. What you do is you take this 750 mils, 3.5 cups, pour it into a saucepan, add 1 packet of Certo, bring it to a boil for 1 minute, add 3.5 cups sugar, bring it back to a boil, for vigorous boil for 1 minute, and put it in jars, and that's what you have. Okay, so if you ever end up with a bottle of wine that you don't care for, you can do that with any of these. That's just a nice little thing to do to have some fun with it. Those are the takeaways, ladies and gentlemen. You know the rules about those, so it's probably time for me to get down to the serious work that I think I'm supposed to do. So I'm going to talk to you about Arctic Char, the raising of Arctic Char, as a possible revenue stream on some land that you may have a responsibility to. Oh, another bias comes out. Getting young people to embrace agriculture and being close to the land. Maybe it's the children of farmers and ranchers, or maybe it's new entries into the world of agriculture. That is a bias of mine, and part of the reason for the honor card at the end of my 40-year-old son's driveway, now you're trying to figure out how old I am, is to have him feel a little bit more connected to what the land can produce. And so some of the ideas that I'm going to share tonight are ideas that may be attractive to young people to either stay on the land or come to the land. Arctic Char is one, and Taylor Grafton, the young man who I'm working with, I'm just keeping track of him because he's a really neat young. Taylor is doing some trials with Arctic Char on the Barquet Ranch just north of Prince George. The Barquet Ranch is owned by the Cordovin family, and it's part of the Carrier Lumber suite of businesses. Fairly large cattle, hay cattle operation. But Taylor sees some real opportunity. His mom and dad are actually the ranch managers, Laura and Mark, but they want to retire. They're kind of like me. They're thinking that maybe it's time that some other people could do some of the stuff. And so Taylor is going to be one of the managers of this ranch, but he is also very visionary. So let me talk to you about Arctic Char. The world has a love affair with animal protein. The world has a love affair with animal protein. That love affair is not going to be addressed adequately by raising beef and selling beef to those who want animal protein. Beef is too inefficient in food conversion. Now, if it sounds like I'm slamming cattle farmers, absolutely the opposite. Absolutely the opposite. We cannot produce enough beef in the right places, in the right ways, to feed the growing demand. It's too inefficient and too expensive. I'm advised, I am not a rancher, but consistently I hear it takes 12 to 14 pounds of input of food to get 1 pound of meat out. I'm not sure if those numbers are accurate, but I see them sufficiently frequently that it probably is pretty close. Fish, 1 to 1. Maybe 1 to 1.2. Dr. Wama, president of the UNBC, has even suggested you can put in less than a pound, depending on the quality of your water and what's in it, and get a pound of fish at the other end. The growing middle classes in China and India are driving this demand for animal protein in unbelievable numbers, and I'm going to share some of that with you. But also the markets in Korea and Japan are extremely significant. I've been on 2 trade missions to China wearing that councillor's hat, but I've also been to China 5 times, 3 of them on a personal level. But when I travel personally, guess what I'm doing? I'm doing homework for things like this. So my last trip I was in Beijing, and for those of you that have been to Beijing or are going to go to Beijing, go to the train station downtown. First, that's just a demographic experience in its own right, because downtown Beijing train station is scary. It's so big and so many people. But right across that very massive street and collection of rail lines is a supermarket. And so I've made my way into that supermarket. I headed straight for the fish section. The fish section is quite interesting because at least half of the product, ranging from the turtles and the frogs and the fish and the eels and all those kind of critters, are alive. Then there's a whole lot that have been dispatched and packaged and so on. Now if you go in there, the Asians like their product fresh. That's why they're alive. And they will pay for those things to be flown from all over the world to be there fresh. And so there was all kinds of fish and stuff there. And it was fun to watch. I just stood to the side. I was the only Caucasian in this massive shop for several hours. And then another gentleman came in later on. If you were shopping, you just took a little, what I call a chicken wire net. You went and scooped out whatever it was you wanted from whatever tank it was, and you walked around the end of the table and handed it to the fishmonger or the butcher or whatever he was. He dispatched it right there and processed it to your directions. You put it in a nice little plastic bag and off you went. I'm telling you that to give you a sense of how it looks over there. But it was massive. It was massive. A cargo plane carrying product from North America to Asia. Now you'll be aware that we have some magnificent infrastructure in place or close to in place. The Prince George Airport is built to accommodate that air cargo traffic. One of the many reasons for making the Cariboo Highway a better highway is to allow for movement of goods quickly and efficiently. Likewise to the container port at the coast at Prince Rupert. A cargo plane landing carries 100 tons. 100 tons. Now they will land for less than 100 tons. They'll land for 25 tons. It's economic for them to land for 25 tons. They would sooner land for 100 tons. But they will land for 25 tons. So when I was in China a couple years ago on the first trade mission, we were sitting at a table. Dr. Wama from UNBC, I talk about Dr. Wama quite a bit, although he's returning to Japan to provide leadership to a university there. He's the president of the University of Northern British Columbia. He is a fish scientist. If you go Google Arctic Char raising, one of the first websites that'll pop up is the Arctic Char fishery in the Yukon. Dr. Wama is the scientist behind that Arctic Char fishery. Just to put it in perspective. Dr. Wama, we're sitting at a table like Dr. Wama, the chief of our First Nations band was sitting there. The mayor of our city was sitting there. The chair of our regional district was sitting there, and several other folks. And one of our Chinese gentlemen that was working with us sat across the table. It was a breakfast meeting in Beijing. He said, "Don," really quite sharply, "Don, how are the Arctic Char farms doing in Prince George?" Of course, all these people are listening. He's directed at me. Why me? I have no idea, other than maybe I'm a wee bit of a sucker. But I said, "Fred," not quite as sharply back because I was taken a little back a little bit. I said, "You know we don't have any Arctic Char farms." He says, "Well, Whitehorse does. So what are you doing about it?" So I decided I was going to do something about it. And this is part of that doing something about it. So I asked one of our other trade mission team members who was going to Shanghai the next day as part of our work. I said, "Can you check with the Trade Commissioner, Canadian Trade Commissioner, and ask a question about Arctic Char?" So Garth did and came back and said to me later that night, he said, "It would sell over here big time." So that's fine. So I work with the Airport Authority in Prince George on a subcommittee that is looking at creating air cargo to wherever these planes want to fly. So I said to Al Ridgway, "Next time you're in China, Al, I want you to ask a Chinese businessman about Arctic Char." So he did. So he's standing in a room full of people, and there's a bit of a break, and he's standing next to a Chinese gentleman and says, "Arctic Char, would you be interested in buying some? By the way, how much did those planes carry?" 100 tons. And the Chinese gentleman said, "Absolutely, I'd be interested." In fact, he says, "I'll take a plane load every day." One businessman. There would be many in Beijing alone who would take that one plane load a day. Some of those planes will go out partially loaded with live fish. therefore not as much product going because water is going. Some will have processed fish on there that'd be frozen or fresh or whatever the words are that would work out. The demand is huge. The demand is huge. Why Arctic Char though, you ask, or you should ask, or you might want to ask. Why Arctic Char? Well, you already know the story about the Atlantic cod fishery. And I suspect you're aware of what's happening to Pacific halibut. The oceans cannot sustain that love affair we have for animal protein in the world. The only way that we're going to be able to address that demand is through the raising of fish. Fish are so efficient in producing animal protein that that's the way we will go. It's just up to you to decide if we should be part of that opportunity or whatever we would wish to call it. Now, Dr. Suzuki and others endorse aquaculture land-based. They don't endorse aquaculture in the ocean. But in land-based aquaculture, we are in a position to be in control of the variables in a very different way. Arctic char is a firm-fleshed, white-fleshed fish. Mild tasting, quick to grow, easy to handle, rears well. So it will be one of the fish that will be the one in demand. Now, this is no secret around the world that Asia will buy a lot of this fresh fish. It's just where are we in the scheme of things in considering our ability to be part of that economic opportunity. Go ahead. My hearing's poor, so you're going to have to shout.
How much would you get from 100 tons of Arctic char?
I'm not going to answer that question because I can't, but I'm going to give you an answer that'll help you figure it out.
Okay.
Arctic char sells currently for about $13 a kilogram. So I don't have to be the math teacher this time, but you can figure that out. And the costs of raising that Arctic char are about $3 a kilogram. Okay? That's about 2.5 times what you'll get for rainbow trout, which are more difficult to raise and not as much in demand as the firm-fleshed, white-fleshed fish. Let me tell you about Arctic char raising, and then let me talk to you about Taylor Grafton. He's just a cowboy. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. He's just an ordinary, really hard-working, bright, nice young man who understands that the way for this to be successful is not just for the Barquet Ranch to have an Arctic char hatchery or farm, but that we have at least 100 of them in northern British Columbia. At least. They don't take up much room, by the way. So let me talk about that for a moment. That clock has got to slow down. Let me talk about that for a moment. Arctic char like it cool, they like it dark, and they like it crowded. They grow optimally in those kinds of conditions. You can play around with the water temperature a little bit. The warmer the water to a point, the faster they grow. But then you increase the possibility of other issues. So they prefer cold water. They like it dark and they like it compact or crowded. They don't grow in outdoor ponds. They grow in tanks, most efficiently. Nothing elaborate. They need good groundwater. Taylor's running his experiment off the well. So let me talk to you about Taylor's experiment. He managed to get 1,000 eggs. Eggs are hard to get. The hatchery in Whitehorse has become so good at producing Arctic char eggs, they don't really sell fish anymore, and they're very careful about who they sell eggs to, because they're not so quick and easy to share. They've evolved into an egg-producing operation, and each char egg 2 years ago was 18 cents. Now, if you know about anything about how many eggs one char lays, you can also do the math. Taylor managed to get his eggs from a supplier in Manitoba. Eggs come in two ways. they come in, well, I call them treated. I'm not the scientist. But you can hatch those eggs. They'll grow into a nice fish in 2 years, a marketable fish, 3 to 5 pounds in 2 years. They're about this big at the end of 1 year. They're about this big at the end of the second year, and are marketable then. But you can buy some eggs that'll hatch into fish, but those fish cannot reproduce. Or you can buy eggs that'll grow into marketable fish, but they will also reproduce. There is a market alone for somebody just to set up an Arctic Char operation that produces eggs that they can sell. That's what Whitehorse has evolved into. Taylor has experimented with this 1,000 eggs that hatched out to about that many fish. It actually was more than that eggs. He only had a permit for that many. The red tape is a bit of an issue. He is more than prepared to help talk people through that. He's a working ranch hand. He can't be doing this all the time. That's why he's not traveling with me this trip. He's prepared to come and commit a chunk of time in the non-hang and non-calving season, by the way. That's how it works, right? Those are important times. Anyhow, he's testing his groundwater. He's discovered that it's quite good, and it works well. And the temperature's right, da-da-da-da. He's tested his pumping systems. Pumping water is simple. Pumping oxygen or air is simple, but he's testing them. But he had a little glitch. He lives on a rural environment. The Chief Lake Road has got beaver ponds around it, and trees fall on power lines. And hydro quits for a while, and so does your pump. Not good for the fish. Solve that quite quickly by having a generator dedicated or very close to where it would automatically kick in to take care of that, even though the operation was small. But he had to prove to himself, where are the challenges? So that was fine. Then the water tanks blew. The pressure tanks blew, all 3 of them. 3 days he didn't have pressure tanks to help with his water system. He had lived his way through it. Then he took 1 week holiday. By the way, to give you a sense of this young man, he's young, he's got a degree in science, animal husbandry, I think. He's working on a master's degree in aquaculture by correspondence while he's running the ranch. And his young wife is taking a master's degree at UBC and some other applied science field. This is a really focused young set of people. He gets the water going, da-da-da-da-da-da. He takes 1 week's holiday because he doesn't see his wife a whole lot during the academic time of the year. And he entrusted the care of the fish to a younger person, to feed them at a certain amount at certain times of the day and to clean the filter. The filter is a pipe, it's a perforated pipe. And if that clogs up, the water doesn't flow through the perforations and down for recirculation. If that clogs up, the water flows over the top and down the pipe. Well, she didn't clean the filter. Guess where 900 of those 1,000 fish went? Anyhow, the owner of the ranch, Bill Cordoban, who I chatted with the other day, is prepared to extend the experiment for another year before they make a decision about what to do. Let me tell you a story about a dating game. Omineca Beetle Action Coalition sponsors a project called Beyond the Market, and we have one of the things we do is we go to places where we line up people who have something to sell along one side of a long table, and we line up the other people that might have the interest in buying it on the other side. And every minute or two we ring a bell and people move and you got a new date across from you. Taylor was at 2 of these speed dating events. First one in Prince George, he's sitting at a table and he's looking across at the then executive chef of Chimu's restaurant, downtown Prince George, one of our nice restaurants. And Wayne Kitchen said to Taylor, "Arctic Char, I'll take every one you got, bring them to the back door, just tell me when. Never talk price. Take every one you got." Next speed dating game was in Vanderhoof. There's Taylor sitting, and at one point in the dating game, sitting right across from him is the manager of the meat section of the Co-op grocery store in Vanderhoof. And he said, "Taylor, load them in the truck and bring them all to the back door. We'll process them for you and we'll keep them. We'll take them. Never ask price." For the first several Arctic Char farmers who get in the game in this part of the world, you don't even have to think about those cargo planes to China or Japan or Korea or wherever. The domestic market will suck up the first several 100,000 pounds of product. I think I might have forgotten to share some information about Arctic Char. And if it comes to me during the course of the evening, I'll jump in. But I'm watching that clock probably way harder than you are, because I have a game plan in my head. I'm going to make this work for you and for me. I talked the longest about Arctic Char than any of the other topics I'm going to talk about, because it has such a huge upside in my world, in my way of seeing the world. Environmentally, it's defensible, and it's supported by a wide range of environmental organizations. And the video would have demonstrated that. That's part of the misfortune of not being able to share it with you. It's only 5 minutes. By the way, in that video, it also shows a tilapia farmer who is a neighbor to Taylor and his Arctic Char farm. But tilapia, he has an aquaponics operation, which is the greenhouse operation and the fish rearing operation, requires more heat. I don't speak with as much vigor on that front, still a great operation, but I don't speak with as much vigor on that because I don't see the upside being as huge as it is with the Arctic Char. The nice thing about the Arctic Char, it doesn't appear that to get into the game costs are horrendous, and it doesn't require much land. A space the size of this larger room would easily accommodate a significant operation. Oh, by the way, only uses about 10% of the water. It keeps recirculating, and the water that flows off is really good for irrigating crops because of fish waste in it. Okay? So I'm going to stop talking about Arctic Char there, wherever I put that. And I'm going to shift gears, or shift saddles, or whatever the right expression is in your part of the world, and I'm going to talk briefly about hemp. Now, some of you may have been part of the hemp trials that have gone on in the Cariboo and other regions, and so you will probably know way more than I do. But there is a significant opportunity in the growing of hemp. And I'm going to give you a sense of it just by reading some material that I brought along with me. Imagine a single product that is so versatile it can be transformed into textiles, clothing, cosmetics, soap, beer, industrial fiber, building materials, and paper. Better yet, imagine that one that can produce that full range of items without using dangerous chemicals. Well, the product already exists, and it is the hemp plant. And I'm talking about industrial hemp, not that other one. Canada's hemp industry is pioneering the development of hemp-based foods. Now, this is where my personal bias is, although that's not necessarily the findings of the trial group down here. Of the hemp-based foods. Food products derived from hemp seed include flour, nutritional bars, pasta, cookies, lactose-free milk, and even ice cream. For health-conscious consumers, hemp seeds are second only to soybeans in furnishing complete proteins. In addition, the seeds can be crushed to provide nutritious oil that contains both omega-3 and omega-6 essential fatty acids. Hemp seed oil's emollient properties also make it an ideal ingredient for producing both leave-on and rinse-off body care products such as lotions and creams. At the industrial end of the spectrum, automobile manufacturers are using hemp fibers to make stronger, lighter, and less expensive structural panels. In the paper industry, hemp can be environmentally preferable to wood because the plant matures in 3 to 4 months and can yield 4 times as much paper as an equal acreage of trees. Just recently, Prince George Citizen had this article in it, and I'm going to just share a little bit of this article with you. Hemp harvest returns to the U.S. Southeast Colorado farmer Ryan Laughlin tried an illegal crop this year. He didn't hide it from his neighbors, and he never feared law enforcement would come asking about it. Laughlin is among about 24 Colorado farmers who raised industrial hemp, marijuana's non-intoxicating cousin that cannot be grown under federal drug law in the U.S., and they were bringing in the nation's first acknowledged crop in more than 5 decades. Emboldened by voters in Colorado and Washington last year giving the green light to both marijuana and industrial hemp production, Laughlin planted 55 acres of several varieties of hemp, alongside his typical alfalfa and wheat crops. The hemp came in sparse and scraggly this month. By the way, this is dated October 15th. But he's still not turning... but he is still turning away buyers. Phone's been ringing off the hook, said Laughlin, who plans to press the seeds into oil and sell the fibrous remainder to buyers who'll use it in building materials, fabric, and rope. People want to buy more than I can grow. But hemp's economic prospects are far from certain. Finished hemp is legal in the US, but growing it remains off limits under federal law. The Congressional Research Service recently noted widely different projections about hemp's economic potential. However, America is one of hemp's fastest growing markets, with imports largely coming from China and Canada. In 2011, the US imported 11.5 million worth of hemp products, up from 1.4 million 10 years previous. Most of that is in hemp seed and hemp oil, which finds its way into granola bars, soaps, lotions, and even cooking oil. Whole Foods Market now sells hemp milk, hemp tortilla chips, hemp seeds coated in dark chocolate, da-da-da-da-da-da. There's an opportunity there. It grows here. The trials have proven that it grows here. There are some challenges, and I know that 100 Mile House has done quite a bit of work. If you are interested in doing a little bit more learning about hemp, you can obviously Google and get some of the same material that I got, but go to the 100 Mile House municipal website, and there is at least 2 articles there that you can access and read more information on in terms of hemp. I'm going to switch horses. Part of the reason there's a dozen bottles of wine sitting on that table, just for fun, just so you know how much fun I have with this. When I finish in Quesnel tomorrow night, I'll have given away 240 bottles of wine this year in talks just like this one. I'm on a mission, no doubt about it, because there are opportunities for you. There are opportunities for you. And I'm going to share some. And a fruit winery is one of those opportunities. How many of you have driven past Bonaparte Winery at Cache Creek? What's the gate sign on the gate say?
Sold out.
Sold out. Virtually the same sign on every gate of every fruit winery in British Columbia. Even the ones that make pumpkin wine. Now the Halloween pumpkins that I grew in my garden this year, in Prince George, pumpkins like this, but I cheat. There's ways of cheating. They were cubed just the other day, and when I get home next week, they are going to Hobby Brews. I don't have the patience to make wine, so one of my hunting buddies makes some, and the rest is Hobby Brews is one of those little brew shops where you buy your wine kits and your beer kits and so on, but they also do it for you. But there's going to be pumpkin wine happening, okay? Now I'm not sure whether the pumpkin wine is going to be flavored with cinnamon or ginger or allspice or some such thing or not. We haven't decided that yet. But already there's a rhubarb wine going that's ginger flavored. And there's 2 apple wines going up in there right now that are going to be flavored. And one of them is going to be turned into champagne. The crabapple one actually is going to be turned into crabapple wine champagne. I'm telling you this, and I give these away, and there's quite a variety of them there, to give you an opportunity to say, hey, it takes about 2,000 to 2,400 cases of wine from a small micro winery to have a reasonable business case. 12 bottles in a case. So it's anywhere from 24,000 to 28,800 bottles of wine to have a business case. Now some of you will be familiar with former Minister Pat Bell, who happens to be a friend of mine. And for 8 straight years, wearing my councillor's hat or my Beetle Coalition hat or my friend's hat, but mostly in formal meetings that I had with Pat, I disciplined myself to do this in formal meetings. There'd be a blue bag under my arm. So I'd walk into a meeting, usually one that I'd arranged on behalf of an organization that I'm part of, whether it was Barkerville or whether it was the Beetle Coalition or whether it was City Council or some other organization. And I had to be respectful how much time I asked of Pat, because they're busy folks. There's always a blue bag under my arm. It became a symbol. And I'd say to the group, so this is the group, we're going to go meet with Pat, and I'd say to you ahead of time, we've got 20 minutes. We've got 20 minutes, that's all we're going to get. But Pat and I get the first 5 of it. And people got used to that, because I would just do this with a blue bag. Sometimes we would talk about that bottle of wine that was in that blue bag. I'm going to share an article, read bits of an article, but I got an email from Pat one night, 10:30 at night, Wednesday night. He was in Victoria. They'd finished a long day at the legislature doing whatever it was they were doing. And I got an email from him saying, that bottle of rhubarb wine, Don, that bottle of rhubarb wine that I bought at the Community Foundation silent auction, I've just blown the dust off it. You're teasing me, aren't you, Don? That's not rhubarb wine. 10:35 at night, Pat, that was rhubarb wine. Don. Don, tastes like Pinot Gris to me. Pinot Gris apparently is a grape of some kind. Doesn't mean much to me, but it did mean a whole bunch to Pat. Every time I had a new wine product, it went in the blue bag. The last bottle I gave him was it actually was the blueberry Saskatoon blend. And it was under my arm, and we were meeting in the legislature, and we had the Premier's Chief of Staff there, a couple of other cabinet ministers, representatives from the 3 Beetle coalitions, and the bag changed hands. There was not a word said about it, though, because the meeting, we didn't have enough time, and Pat and I have our own little system of making this work. Pat announced a couple weeks ago formally that he and his family are building a fruit winery on Pulp Mill Road in Prince George. What does that mean to you? Why would you give a rip about that? Well, let's just get a little background first. This is Pat's son speaking. In 2016, by the way, the winery will start producing wine in 2015, but not in time for the Canada Games. You'll notice I'm also doing some advertising, my vest and my jacket and so on. I like to do this kind of thing. But they will have a product for the 2015 Games, but it won't be made in their winery. They're allowed under their license to have somebody else make it for a period of time till their winery is up and running. In 2016, we'll be opening a world-class restaurant featuring locally grown foods, he said. Doug is only one of the Bells involved in the winery. His mother and father, Brendan, Pat, plus a number of shareholders are participants. The Bells have 2 of the two Wendy's restaurants in town, so they're into that kind of thing. Remember the restaurant piece, because I'm going to also talk about that later, as long as I remember. Pat Bell was also a longtime MLA and cabinet minister. As Minister of Agriculture, he developed an interest in winemaking and said he considered leaving the city when he ended his political career this past year, to settle in a warmer climate where grapes could grow. He's trying 60 grape plants in his front lawn in Prince George. Someone changed his mind. And I'm going to skip the part where he talks about me, because it is quite complimentary, and I'm a little bit humble. Not a whole lot humble. But the first fruit wine I ever tried was Don's rhubarb wine, the one that we emailed back and forth on. He confessed he was reluctant to try a fruit wine, so used to grapes was he. His focus on the grape was so strong that he and his wife Brenda walked out of the Bonaparte winery in Cache Creek when they discovered all the bottles were fruit wine. He walked out. But just to be supportive, Bell purchased a local produce basket at the Spirit of the North Healthcare Foundation, made by me and my wife, and it included a bottle of rhubarb wine. Months went by with the wine in Pat Bell's basement until, in a surge of obligation, his words, he blew the dust off and popped the cork. And that led to the exchange of emails I referred to. I just loved it. I was surprised by the taste and how it really was a wine. I had it in my head it would be different. Don't ask me how, but that wine changed everything. He goes on to talk about me consistently showing up on his doorstep with one of the latest creations, even though he's already started the winery. You know that ginger rhubarb wine I mentioned moments ago? He's getting a bottle. And then the pumpkin wine will come out a little bit later. He will get a bottle. But you have to know he's got Haskap wine waiting for me. Coming this way. Not a bad thing. For the purposes of celebrating the launch of the business operations and giving visiting friends and dignitaries that were there at the announcement on the banks of the Chaco River where they bought the property, the Bells had an array of fruit wines to be sampled, all from the Bonaparte Winery. So what does that mean to you? How many of you know where Heritage Acres is? The little Heritage Acres farm. How many of you know where it is? Just north of Quesnel. Little operation, east side of the highway, as you're going north on your right. Sign out in front of there said for years, black currants for sale, or currants for sale. I whipped in there one day, well actually 2 years ago, or 2 summers ago, whipped in there because I wanted some black currants for wine, because my bushes aren't as vigorous as his. I was amazed at the crop he was growing. Amazed. And then I walked across their driveway. Have you been there? Walked across the driveway and there's the haskap, or the honeyberry. Haskap is a marvelous berry. Go home and do some research on it. Another homework assignment from the old school principal. It blossoms in April. The blossom can handle about -8 degrees. It fruits in June. You pick the fruit in June. It's a very lovely tasting berry, kind of strawberry, blueberry, raspberry, something like that. Seeds are very small, so they don't get in the way of using them. It's a long, oblong, blue, purpley berry. There are 6 mature bushes in my front yard and 6 that are going to mature in 2 more years. We got a pretty decent crop off that. So I said to this fellow, this is pretty impressive. I'd done my homework on haskap, so I was really excited by the fact that he had chosen to develop a revenue stream, my theme, on his property using these berries. So I said to Pat Bell, get down there and have a look at this. So Pat went down. And he walks into the chap's place and said, Bassermann said I need to come here. The guy says, yeah, you needed to come here. It appears that Pat has made a commitment to the bulk of this year's crop, which is now picked and frozen and being held for Pat to have turned into haskap wine. And Pat apparently has made a commitment to the bulk of next year's crop. That's what it means to you. That's where your opportunity is. Because Pat's looking for fruit wine producers. Don is looking for multiple wineries that will all be fruit producers. Pat has a license to make wine, and that same license allows him to sell wine. Do you know how significant that is to you? He has a license to make it, and he has a license to sell it. So if you are able to produce fruit that he needs, or others who we can persuade to do fruit wineries so they can put sold out on their gates, there's an opportunity for you for a revenue stream from some land you have a responsibility for. My son's backyard will hold about 100 haskap bushes. Now, he and I have not had this conversation, but we are going to. He knows it's coming. He wouldn't let me put apple trees in, though. But anyhow, I'm big on haskap, but Pat's going to need, he has ordered thousands of apple trees, thousands of rhubarb plants, gooseberries, red currants, black currants, commercial Saskatoons, and there's other stuff I'm not remembering. He has to raise about 25% under the license that he has been provided. He has to raise about 25% of his own fruit, and then he can purchase the rest. But the conditions of the license are such. That winery would employ about 6 people full-time and another 6 on a part-time basis. That restaurant I talked about, that's not in those numbers. Pat's business case is built on 2,000 cases. 24,000 bottles to start up. There's an opportunity for you to be in on the game if you have an interest. But what really excites little old country boy Don Bassermann, who's a fanatic huckleberry picker and Saskatoon picker and other things out there, is if I pick 200 pounds of huckleberries, which is easy for me to do, I cheat there too, I use a rake. And if you want to talk about raking berries and then how to clean them quickly afterwards, we'll do that after I'm finished. But if I walk in with my 200 pounds of huckleberries to sell to Pat's winery, all he's going to do is freeze them until he amalgamates a large enough number of berries to make a micro batch. And he might only produce 200 or 300 bottles of huckleberry wine, but you know it's going to be at a premium price because he has a license to do what? Make it and sell it. So what does that mean to you? That means you can go pick 50 pounds of berries and sell them. Or your neighbor can go pick 122 pounds of berries and sell them. Huckleberries in Prince George are going for about $40 to $50 for an ice cream pail full, a gallon. Now, I'm not going to get $50 from Pat to sell huckleberries at his door, but I'm going to get somewhere around 40. Does that mean anything to you or your neighbors or your friends or people who are close to the land and have an opportunity to harvest and get a modest, a very tiny revenue stream? Think about it. Again, I share the fruit winery idea as just an idea to help develop a revenue stream. Oh, that clock. Okay, switch saddles again. I hope I'm not shifting too fast. I hope I'm not taking too long in some of the topics. Willow fuel. I stopped at PRT Nurseries in Red Rock, just south of Prince George, on my way down. I visited there before. Anybody been there? It's a nursery that grows seedlings for the forest industry. And PRT is all over the country and even in the States. And if you Google, another homework assignment if you're interested, Google PRT willow production. They grow willow to produce fuel for their own greenhouse needs. Here's what they do. They go out and their land is terrible. It's gravelly, it's dry. They shove in the ground. Now they were using in their trials, they had a number of willows, they were using some hybrid willows. They shove this whippet or whatever it's called in the ground and let Mother Nature grow it. That fall, they mow them all down. It grows up, I don't know, it grows up here somewhere. They mow it down. What happens next year? It grows back, but it grows out the side of that base. I walked through the willow plantation when I had a tour of it. It averaged 5 shoots out the side of that one whippet going in. Sometimes some were 3, sometimes some were 8. Averaged 5. I think they grow them for 2 years. I might be wrong in my time frame there. And then they come along with an old sugarcane harvester and cut it and chip it and use it for fuel to heat their greenhouses to reduce their dependence on natural gas costs. Willow grows here. If you have some marginal land, it might be a revenue stream opportunity for you. Now, if you Google their website, you'll see kind of a neat little tractor thing that goes along. It's kind of like a combine. It cuts the willow, kicks it back there somewhere where it gets chipped, and it gets blown into the trailer towed behind. Okay? I'm not sure whether that piece of machinery is now on the Red Rock operation or it's in one of their others, because when you hit their website, you get the global website to start with. But willow production is a crop. And in the demand for fiber fuel, maybe there's an opportunity for you. Now, when I say these things, I recognize for a single individual operation to necessarily come up with a capital may not work for you. But if you start to pull together some thinking around a cooperative approach or such thing, you might be able to get into the mix. Or there might be one of a collection of players that, look, I'm in a position to buy the equipment, but I need to understand that I've got your crop to harvest and yours and yours and yours. You know, those kinds of things there. My goal, my purpose tonight is to have you think about yet another revenue stream opportunity. I'm going to switch horses again. I like this one. Well, I like them all. Birch sap. Anybody know what a birch tree looks like? Anybody been near a birch tree recently? Anybody going to be near a birch tree in April? I'm going to talk about birch sap. I'm not going to spend virtually any time talking about birch syrup, or birch beer, or birch vodka, or birch teas, although if you talk to me afterwards, I'll talk about teas, or birch vinegars, or birch wines, or birch medicinals. I'm not going to talk about those. They exist. I'm going to talk about birch sap as a sports beverage. As a sports beverage. Some of you will probably know way more than me about the ability of a birch tree to produce sap, but it's really quite significant with virtually no harm to the tree. I'm going to read an article from Finland. In Finland, they do a reasonable amount of birch sap production for sports beverage drinks. Any of you ever had a glass of birch sap? Good, good. I haven't. And here I am standing, so I got to change that this year. I have some spigots so ready to go, just because I'm going to play with some of it. I'm not interested in doing the birch syrup. There are those who do it in this region, and good for them. It's a high-end product, and good for them. But there is an opportunity, I think a way bigger opportunity. Here's the article. Drink of the gods, elixir of life, power juice. Few beverages lay claim to so many health benefits as birch sap, and the early spring is the best time to collect it. I thought it was the only time. Sap has been consumed for centuries in Nordic countries, as well as in Central Europe, Canada, and Korea. It was used by former generations to fight everything from spring fatigue to scurvy and rickets. It has also been drunk to promote the secretion of urine as a treatment for kidney disease. Canada's Aboriginal peoples treated arthritis with birch sap. It is also said to ease the symptoms of gout. Cattle would be given birch sap in spring to help them recover from the rough winter. Now, birch sap has become popular as a health beverage in Japan and Central Europe. They have received a variety of information on what are anecdotal health benefits. What they have done, the people who submitted this article, what they've done is the domestic market for birch sap beverage in Finland is really quite small. Not a huge population. So they started to market into Europe, greater Europe, and Japan with considerable success. But those of you that know something about birch sap, it doesn't last long without treatment. It needs to be pasteurized or sterilized or something, but if you heat it, that drives off some of the essential oils, such as the wintergreen products in it. Therefore, it loses some of its value. So to bottle it, you have to treat it so it doesn't lose its value and go bad on you. By the way, there will be a new bottling works in Quesnel when that little new brewery, the Barkerville Brewery, right? When the Barkerville Brewery starts up, there'll be a bottling line there. There's already a bottling line in Prince George with the Pacific Western Brewery. And somebody might wish to start a bottling line if they see the real potential of this possibility, this revenue stream. So if you can't boil it or heat it to keep it well, it appears the Finns treat theirs with ultraviolet light so that it's preserved and lasts for the longer haul. I think there is an opportunity for a revenue stream from birch sap in our part of British Columbia. I've talked about this in a number of communities. There was certainly a gentleman in the audience last night that was interested. I'm watching that clock really carefully, and I'm hoping to finish in about 9 or 10 minutes. Switching horses again, park birch sap. My goal is to intrigue your thinking about the possibilities for you or those that you know on revenue streams from land you may have a responsibility for. I used to talk about cabbages, carrots, and potatoes. And I was talking about cabbages and carrots and potatoes because they're firm vegetables, part of the reason some of them are on the table. They're firm vegetables that could probably be containerized and shipped through the Port of Prince Rupert to somewhere. You don't need daylight to plant them or harvest them. You don't need dry weather necessarily to plant them or harvest them like you do for some other crops. And I was talking to Josh Van Haeg about this one day. Josh owns the Art Nap stores in Prince George. He quickly started to identify all the places that cabbages, carrots, and potatoes grew well in the greater Prince George area. 2 weeks later, I'm going up to Art Knapp's to get some spring supplies. And now Josh is a big, hard-working Dutchman. And here comes this big, hard-working Dutchman across the parking lot. Bassermann, Bassermann, Bassermann. Remember, I'm a city councillor. My wife's with me. I think Josh has got a beef with the city councillor because he was really aggressive or animated. I said to my wife, it's going to take about an hour. Go in the store and have fun. He happens to have a clothing line in his garden store, by the way, because he has diversified his revenue streams. Anyhow, he says, carrots, carrots, carrots. I realized I wasn't in trouble as a councillor. He said, been thinking, a modest press would juice those carrots. The demand for vegetable juice in North America, not offshore, although it's probably there too, is really quite significant. He says that would be worth doing. And oh, by the way, that pulp left over from pressing the carrots, using some of the surplus heat we have around our industries, dry it, bale it, and ship it to Japan for horse feed. So my cabbages and carrots and potatoes kind of went to vegetable juice with a couple of them. So that left potatoes. Do potatoes grow around here?
Yes.
They grow darn near everywhere. So do cabbages and carrots. That's why we pick those things. There are some issues with some of them, particular carrot fly if you don't do some right things. But the potatoes, Pemberton grows potatoes. Pemberton sells their potatoes to a distillery. That distillery makes vodka. I heard a story about an investor wanting to put a distillery in Vanderhoof, and they wanted to import the grains to distill to make the spirit. And I'm saying, what? Do you know how potatoes grow in Vanderhoof? Interesting that I heard that it was going to happen in Vanderhoof. Anyhow, so the BC Liquor Control Board system says that the managers of the store, of liquor stores, with the advice of a variety of folks, determine which products go on the shelves in each community. Pemberton's vodka was having trouble finding its way onto a shelf anywhere, except for one store. Vanderhoof. Vanderhoof started the distribution of the Pemberton vodka into the liquor store system. Small community, that's the way it happened. There might be a revenue stream opportunity for you in cabbages, carrots, and or potatoes, but there's some other things we might need to have happen along the way. One of the things is to try to get investors in the room. Sometimes the investors are you. Sometimes their investors are financial institutions or some other kinds of arrangements. Quickly, math class. Tourism as an alternative revenue stream for farmers and ranchers and landowners, owners of character land. I love doing a presentation on tourism, particularly product development. I have given some serious thought to starting a tourism business called dry land cruising. Dry land cruising is where I take that 1-ton big diesel crew cab truck of mine and hook up my big RV behind and get 3 to 4 very well-heeled clients, and I am cruising them around north central British Columbia. I'm prepared to do a 5-day package, don't particularly like it. I like a 7-day package, prefer a 10, and then I want to get rid of them and they want to get rid of me. But in that 10 days, I travel them around. They get a wild game dinner one night on that trip, and they get a wild fish dinner one night on that trip, and this is the kind of wine they drink on that trip. And I am charging them per person the same kind of money I pay when I take a salmon fishing charter at Prince Rupert. Between $500 and $800 per person per day. And as I drive by your character piece of land, I'd like to be able to pull in with you knowing in advance, and I'm going to pay you $50 for that night. I'm going to pull in, I'm going to park my big unit, I'm going to get my guests out about 3 in the afternoon, because I'm going to start preparing. I'm a cook. I like to cook. I'm going to start preparing that meal because I've already shown them the whatever, the wildlife and we've picked huckleberries or some Saskatoons or some stuff that we're going to add to the meal as part of their experience. But you are part of their experience with your character piece of land. Because when I pull in onto your ranch or your farm, I'm going to pay you $50. But here's what I want from you. First, I want the opportunity to park on your land for the night. I want your time for 1 hour. I don't really need the whole hour, but I say an hour because it makes your math easier. And what I want from you for that 1 hour, and I want a little wee bit of firewood. As long as we can have fires in season, I want to have a little bit of firewood. And if you have different firewoods there that I can play around with the odor of the fire, even better. It's so much fun to play around with the odor of fire with people from other parts of the world, right? Our girls from Germany. But what I want from you is I want you to take a half an hour of your time with us and tell us a story. I want you to tell us about your family, or I want you to tell us about the history of the ranch or the land, or I want you to tell us about the kind of cattle you're raising or the hogs you're raising or the turkeys you're raising or whatever. That's what I want from you. That's it. If the weather's crummy, we'll sit inside the RV and do the same thing. You might get an opportunity to taste some of this. But I'll pay you $50 a night for that. Now, if I happen to be near a First Nations community, I would like, or if I'm stopping in a First Nations community, I would like the same kind of opportunity, but I would like to hear about the cultural experience from a First Nations perspective. That is worth something to visitors. And I'd like to do that. I'd like you to do that on your character piece of land 2 nights a week for 16 weeks in a year. You got the pieces for the math question I just posed you, right? $50 a night. Oh, by the way, well, no, $50 a night for a unit. Do that twice a week for 16 weeks of the year. You figure out how much that is in your pocket. Your relationship with Revenue Canada is your matter, not mine. I'm paying you in cash. But when I did this in Vanderhoof in the spring, a lady in the room went like this. She said, Don. I said, yeah, what's up? Got to go to the washroom? No. She said, could we have 2 people stop every night? I said, absolutely. You take two units every night. Oh, by the way, those 2 units only need you for that same 1 hour. You don't have to have 2 separate hours. Same story, just to a larger group. I could see the math going through her head for those 16 weeks. Then another lady on the other side of the room said, Don, what if we do this every night of the week with 2 units for 16 weeks? I said, you figure it out. It's up to you. It's a revenue stream. It's a revenue stream. It can be packaged and can be marketed. I like that dry land cruising thing, by the way, because it fits what I like to do. It fits what I like to do. And it's an opportunity in its own right, but that's in a tourism talk for another day. Okay, I gotta really go. I got 4 minutes left. Any of you know Rick Jones? Lives down in towards 100 Mile House. I met Rick a few years ago. He was at one of my urban farming talks, and I talked about selling his manure pile, where I talked about people selling their manure pile. A bag of steer manure at Art Knapp's this year was $3.99 for a 20-liter bag. $3.99. I could get 10 of them for $3.50 each if I wanted to pay $35 for 10. Now Rick has started a process down there after chatting before, and he showed me the photos of his equipment when I was down speaking last year, and he was in my session last night. He started down that path, but your manure pile is worth something. It's worth something. It's an environmental problem for farmers and ranchers anyway. Not so much up here as it is in the Fraser Valley, but it is an issue. If you go into a gardening shop, they sell hundreds of thousands of bags of steer manure a year, all of it coming from somewhere else. I can't figure out why you're not in on the action. Been to China, actually 5 times. Any of you ever been to China? Did you have Peking duck when you were there? Did you? You can't go to China and not have Peking duck. Actually, they do so much Peking duck in China. Do you have any idea how many billions of ducks they need just to do the Peking duck thing in China? It's billions of them. Ducks grow well here. ducks handle cold weather better than chickens do. There is an infrastructure in place to get those ducks to China. I understand that there's some marketing challenges along the way. We are collectively smart enough to figure that out with help from people who work in those areas. I'm going to shift from ducks to goats. There's a chap just outside of Prince George, grows 500 or 600 or 700 goats a year. There are people in the Fraser Valley who've switched from sheep to goats because of the ethnicity of the communities they're near. If there's an East Indian population near a place, your goat meat will sell. There are aircraft, cargo aircraft, 100-ton aircraft, leaving Australia for India, loaded with goat meat. Now, I'm talking about the international scene quite a bit in my presentations, but please remember there is a significant domestic market to be met first. The last two things, and these are really quick, and I just got time. Nettles and horseradish. A must homework assignment for you tonight is to Google the nutritional qualities of stinging nettle. It grows really well here. Have any of you ever done that with stinging nettle? It is a magnificent health food product, and that's part of the reason I try to always include it at the table. We harvest stinging nettle every spring, my wife and I, and when people know we're going out, they want to come along. So usually there's a crowd goes out with Don because he's foraging today, because they know when stinging nettles are ready, May 15th-ish, Mother's Day-ish in Prince George, so are the fiddleheads, and so is false Solomon seal, or wild asparagus. And so we go out in a patch half the size of this room. We will pick, for 3 families, enough vegetables for the week. Of the stinging nettle portion, which we use gloves to do, stinging nettles lose their sting when you heat them or dry them. Okay? So when we get home with it, they dry really, really quickly. We just take the tops of the bushes. They dry really, really quickly. We just break them down into tea, or we powder them to sprinkle in soups and stews and whatever you want to do. My wife uses it as, then we cook some fresh as spinach, like we would cook spinach. And then we freeze some from that's been cooked, and my wife uses it in lasagna instead of spinach. And the Foxhole Bakery in Telqua uses it in spanakopita instead of spinach. It's a niche market opportunity. It's expensive in health stores. Think about it. And the last one is horseradish. Part of the reason I like having horseradish on the table, it grows really well here, takes some managing. I like horseradish on my beef, roast beef. Do you? I really like it with my roast moose. I do a bit of seafood, and we use it to make our own seafood sauce. And so we make it. 60 to 80% of the world's supply of horseradish is grown in Illinois. I'm not sure why we're not at the party, at least for the domestic market. Niche market, possible revenue stream for a piece of character land that you're responsible for. To wrap it up, you've got this nice roast beef or roast moose sandwich, and I used to lather horseradish on it. I like this good jumpy stuff, and eat that. If it's spring and you've got a horseradish plant in your yard or nearby, consider going out and breaking off some of those nice little green shoots, the new shoots. Instead of putting lettuce on your roast moose sandwich, put a couple of the horseradish leaves. Not sure if any of you have tried that. Or take those horseradish leaves, those nice young ones, and just snip them into as an addition to your green salad, because they give it some character and jump. I'm hoping that some people will start selling those, at least at a start, in the farmers markets. Ladies and gentlemen, my goal was to get to 8:30. I was told I might be able to go to 9, but I'm not going to go to 9 in this form. What I was hoping to do this evening was interest you sufficiently to say, hey, Those are ideas that might apply to something that I could do. Or, that was my list, not necessarily your list. If you were to write a list, it might have other opportunities on it. It might have things on it like florals, floral products, cones, cattails, oozy or dogwood red willow and yellow willow, pussy willows, da-da-da-da, because there's a market for those. There's empty refrigerator trucks going to the flower show in Vancouver every day past here. What if we had lilacs on them? Because our lilacs bloom quite a bit later than at the coast. What about if I started to talk to you about mint as a niche operation? There's a whole economic opportunity in doing teas. There's an opportunity waiting to happen. Opportunity waiting to happen. A lady's going to phone me when I get home and talk more about the teas, a lady from the 100-mile area. She said, how can I market that, Don? So I gave her some ideas on that. And farmers market was one of them. Farmers markets aren't efficient enough for me, because it means I have to be there. And it's one day a week. It doesn't work for me. But an honor card at the end of my driveway, I don't have to be there. I trust people. We proved it. And I can do it every day. Gail, it's your turn. Here's what we're going to do now. I'm finished. I've had fun. Hopefully you've learned a few things. I am going to be around for a bit. I'm staying in town, obviously. Too far to drive home tonight. I'm going to get Gail, and if she needs to second somebody to give her a hand, the names come out of the box fast. In the order they come out, you come up and help yourself to one of the takeaways on the table.
Pat Young. Melissa Vaughn. Kathleen Carter. Chris Hornby. June Harry. Harp.